Hi, everyone. My name is Jeanette Bayumi, and I'm an antitrust associate at Freshfields Bruckhaus Derringer in New York. I'm here today with Ruby Zefo as part of the ABA Antitrust Section Spotlight interview series, where we interviewed those working in the fields of antitrust, privacy, cybersecurity, and consumer protection. So welcome, Ruby. We're very excited to have you here. Would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a bit about your current position?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Uber, and my role is obviously to run the entire global privacy compliance program, but we also manage cybersecurity, legal, and increasingly, AI related things, because that is being folded into privacy laws all over the place recently, sometimes in the guise of something called automated processing, but we find ourselves at the forefront of a lot of that compliance as well.
That's fascinating. And so can you tell me a little bit about how you became involved in privacy and cybersecurity law?
Sure. So I had been in-house now for many years. I started out as a litigator, and through the course of my career, I switched it up quite a bit. I've probably had maybe 8 different practice areas in the field of law. And I was at Intel Corporation before I came to Uber. And I started there running the trademark group, but then I expanded into other things. I started doing corporate responsibility work and other things. And then, people don't really understand that such a large chip maker often evolves into something else. Like Intel's done a lot of stuff over the years, and they ended up having a pretty business to consumer roadmap, which included buying McAfee, which most people knew at the time, but also was getting into wearables. So they have bought a really strong heart rate sensor on a wearable band. And then the most incredible thing, it started developing a set-top box that would allow you to stream any media you wanted. And the set-top box had a camera in it to see which user was using it. And so it had this recording device and stuff. Now, an idea ahead of its time. It ended up being sold off because Intel couldn't get the media relationships. But what an idea ahead of its time. It's what we all do right now.
Yeah.
And so, right. So it's had an incredible history of inventing things that later become a thing, even if they weren't commercialized. But at that point, my boss came in and said, look at this roadmap. Like, we are moving into these consumer products where there is a lot of personal data, and we need somebody to really build a strong global privacy team. And we had a small team that was being run out of the policy group at the time. And she's like, this has to be amped up overnight. And while you're at it, go support the CIO, which was probably a 6,000 to 7,000 person entity at the time, and figure out what's going on with cybersecurity too. So it basically just drop kicked into this role overnight, and that's how it started. And then it's the longest practice area I've had, because if you're a person who is a constant learner and really, wants to keep doing new things, this field never slowed down. I thought at the time, this is like 11 years ago, I thought, well, this is a thing, it's going to continue, but I didn't dream it would become as big as it is, as difficult as it is, and so it's just really kept me entertained
Sure.
for that long.
Sure. It's a constantly evolving space and a constantly evolving field. So around, I guess, that time, 11 or 12 years ago, were there significant laws being passed in cybersecurity, and was that sort of the impetus for trying to expand the group that you had?
No, we knew GDPR was coming. It wasn't finalized or anything yet, but we knew that was already coming. But there was already the European directive, which was the precursor to the regulation. And as a global company, there were already compliance challenges there. But also, it's funny how it started, because you kind of hit on something there. The first thing that really hit the press was all the data breaches, right? Oh my gosh, somebody's data has been exfiltrated, and we're all going to have fraud and identity theft. Right. And so there were big articles, all the time in newspapers about the millions of users whose data, was at risk. And it was interesting to watch that cycle morph over time to something that was very much, well, how did they get that data? Why do they have that data? Who are they sharing that data with? Why is this pair of shoes following me around on the internet? Well, for me, it's shoes because I like shoes. But, and then it was my phone is listening to me because now I'm getting all these ads. Well, that was all about how your data is being used. It wasn't anything about breach. And in fact, I was just reading in the news some things about the Cambridge Analytica scandal that called it a data breach. That wasn't a data breach. Nobody exfiltrated data against anybody's will. It was how data was being used or misused, how that traveled along and influenced elections. Nobody stole it. So, that's the conversation today, right? You do still see data breaches, but honestly, compared to all the articles and the political, challenges and the policymakers' attention, it's not on that. It's who's got our data, why, what are they doing with it, and who they're sharing with it.
Yeah. Well, I know it's definitely a hot topic in many different, legal circles, data and privacy, especially in Europe. So I'm curious in terms of your work, how often do you consider what's happening in Europe and how that relates back to your current position in the US?
Yeah, all the time, because, Uber is not just a global company, but we have challenges of being both in the digital and the physical world, right? We cross that boundary. So in addition to, privacy laws, we have a lot of safety concerns that we have to deal with. And it's interesting how those work together because we're very much interested in safety, but how anyone views the balance between safety and their privacy rights, depends on their environment. And those two things can be, impactful against each other. So for example, if you're in certain countries in South America, which are, more dangerous, they want recordings in vehicles. And, Paris doesn't maybe, So the balance of what seems invasive can really change by jurisdiction on what people are comfortable with and what they would rather have versus something else. So we're always looking at global laws, and Europe, of course, coming out with the first major omnibus regulation that then sort of took the world by storm, kind of became everybody's baseline. And now the state laws you see cropping up in the United States have repeat elements of GDPR in them already. Now, they don't copy GDPR. GDPR is a framework, by the way, which I feel like could be toggled for American sensibilities and still work pretty well. And since so many companies are already complying with that, it seems like a good place to start. But what you see is a replication of a lot of consumer rights across, the US now, California, of course, where I live, being the first instigator of a major omnibus state law. And so you can just expect more of that to come, which is a good thing, but it becomes a scalability problem when everybody wants to do it differently.
Right. Well, this is so fascinating. I could talk to for hours about these sorts of laws. But for our viewers who might be students or young attorneys, I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit about what do you do in your day-to-day role as in-house counsel at Uber? It'd be great to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have a global team, which is great. They're just really fantastic people all over the world. And so we do a lot of different things. But, the first challenge is honestly just interpreting new laws and then creating some kind of compliance framework around them, right? So every time some new major different, not a copycat, but a different law drops, we have to have, work streams and a framework for how we're going to, what we have to change to comply with it. And that's just, even that is a lot of work. And so you end up having, I read feeds daily, every single day I get a little set of feeds that I at least skim so that I don't miss anything important, because that is how fast things are changing. And it's not just reading the laws, it's reading the guidance that comes out, the implementing regulations, and then of course, any kind of enforcement decisions. You got to really keep up on all of it, because any of that could impact you. So even that is just a lot of work, but obviously then you have to put it into practice. So we have a privacy by design system, which is called privacy reviews. And then we have privacy impact assessments that get cranked out on all the products and services that process data from that. And then there's a whole set of processes, policies, guidelines, internal and external notices that are created and updated. As I said, we collaborate with the safety product team all the time. We collaborate on new web and in-app privacy features. This is where we actually build a specific feature for users that isn't legally required, just want to make it a good experience. So one of my favorites is explore your data. If you don't want that giant data download that has everything in it, I just want to know how many rides I took and what my star rating is and how I got it, or whatever. You can go into our new privacy center and you can pull down all kinds of handy, easy to use information and some controls that you can use. And so we have to, periodically we collaborate with our wonderful products team on creating those. That's my favorite part of the job, by the way. I love creating the new products and features that are just for privacy by privacy. We run the, obviously, since I said we do cybersecurity, we run the incident management program, and then we create all the KPIs and assessments and measurements that go with trying to make sure you're measuring how well you're doing, where the gaps are and where you can make improvements. And then I add on my, my extracurriculars. I co-chair the Privacy and Cybersecurity Council and AI Council. I co-chair the Women at Uber Employee Resource Group, which is the largest one. And I do a lot of other DEI work because I care so deeply about that, given how long I've been, out in the business world and not seen the kind of change one would hope for by now. So I do a lot of that as well, and include that in all the public speaking I do because it's so important.
Wow. Well, sounds like you're very busy.
It's a lot, I'm not gonna lie.
Sure, I'm sure. Wow, there's so to me, what's pretty interesting is the fact that you get to work closely with the product developers at Uber as well. And I think that's not very typical for a lawyer to have an opportunity like that. Could you talk a little bit more about, that sort of collaboration and why are they consulting in-house counsel for product development?
Yeah, well, we work with the engineering team and the product development team, right? Because engineers are also using data to do all kinds of, wonderful things. And so we also work with the product council who, the product teams have their own council. So it's, a lot of collaboration. You can't really have this job if you don't want to collaborate across literally the entire company. But it's some of the best part of the job because you have this bird's eye view of everything that's being developed and cranked out that processes personal information, which, can be a lot of different things depending on the type of company you work for. But, they send it in for a review and you talk about what it does, how it's processing the data, what kind of legal basis you have to process the data, whether it needs to be, implemented differently in any particular country, any controls that need to be put in place. That's from the design phase on through, when it's launched and end of life. So if anything changes, like you want to, this one's not really working as we expected, then you may change it. We do a lot of beta testing too. Like we don't know specifically what our customers really want. We think it's something like this. Let's do a little, beta test in a couple markets and see. So we do that as well. And then if it seems to have some legs, we'll do it a little more broadly, or it may be a country by country thing. Sometimes it just takes a while to roll something out globally. So it's all really a good way to understand what's happening in the company and a super fun part of the job. But the team that develops the privacy and safety products per se is a little bit different. And that one is my favorite because that one is, right in the heart of what you want to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's very fascinating. And, as the area continues to grow, I'm sure more and more young attorneys will be interested in in-house positions or positions where they get to work with, big tech companies, such as Uber. So it's great to have that insight into it. One question I do have is, how do you think your role at Intel or maybe before you were at Intel? How do you think your previous roles prepared you for your role at Uber?
You know, everybody has their own journey on this one. So I'm not saying, you know, my history is, you know, the best way to do it, but I do think that a lot of it has been super helpful. So I think it's helped to have a really broad in-house background because, you know, I ask people to have a development plan because it really helps me understand what they want to learn and how they want to grow, whether they stick to it or not. And it helps identify their strengths and their areas for development. And I've had great conversations over my own development plans, but I've never followed it. I've pivoted a lot. And so you can't tell in advance when a little nugget of information will help you. I mean, honestly, in my position now, just having worked a lot on budget processes in the past has been super helpful. I always have a really good relationship with people who hold the purse strings because I'm a great forecaster. I stick to my budget. You know, so who knew? Like, I wasn't thinking that way when I took a job that first required an enormous amount of budgeting, which was back when I ran a global trademark team and we had all kinds of prosecution and enforcement costs. So you know, and then working at tech companies for so long is helpful. You have to understand how things work. You don't have to be an engineer, but you have to have enough savvy to understand how things work and how they are impacted by data. And I just ended up knowing a lot of stuff, business and legal stuff, and leading global teams and creating global teams. And so it's just been super helpful. And then the litigation lens, I practiced litigation for just under 3 years before I got poached away by a client. It's always helpful because thinking immediately about what the worst case scenario is just a good nugget to have planted in the back of your mind. Yeah. But that's not the end of it, because you also, in addition to mitigating risk, you have to look at how do you enable the business though, right? It's not just about mitigating risk. It's how do I make this business happen and how do I support it and how do I do it in a way that finds the right risk level for the client base. So I think that's been really helpful. And then just embracing change. I'm not going to lie, I was bad at embracing change when I first started out. You know, I would be sticking to a plan and then it would pivot and I'd just be like, you know, it pivot a lot. And then I'd be like exasperated. And I finally read this just small little silly book called Who Moved My Cheese? It's old. It's been around forever. And it really helped me look at change as a benefit and an opportunity. And after I changed my mindset to, I can make something good happen with this change and I can build something better than it was before. This may be a forcing factor. And sometimes I wished I'd done it earlier. That really helped me deal with all of the pivots that happen when you're an in-house lawyer. And it's a lot.
Well, sort of piggybacking off of that, what would you say has been one of your biggest challenges in this role?
Well, for anyone in my role or similar role, it's literally the lack of harmonized and constantly evolving laws, plus the pace at which the technology we're all using to build this stuff is changing. You know, privacy is so cultural and personal to people, and how we use technology is the same, right? What you're comfortable with, how you use things. And so it's this constant mosh pit of evaluation and judgment where there may not be a simple answer. And that makes it challenging, but also very exciting. And so I would say that's probably the big thing. And then just keeping up with the business and the evolving environment, and then keeping everyone motivated and connected, which during COVID was a challenge for everyone, but, you know, for every manager. But I think, you know, for a business that can be impacted by external factors as much as Uber was, it was a double challenge. And so we had things like, we had drag queens and sangria, which was fun, global event, which meant that the people in Europe loved their sangria at whatever, let's just say 6 p.m. But here in the US, we're drinking our sangria at 8. But you know what? It was 6 p.m. somewhere else.
You're right.
We had murder mystery. We did a tiny campfire, which was telling stories around a mini candle with a mini s'more. And I accidentally lit the bottom of my personal computer monitor on fire. But you will be happy to know that there's a second chassis underneath the first one if you have a big Dell monitor. So
Oh,
go Dell.
good to know.
So these things were meant to just help people feel connected, like we're all out here for them. I had some people who were single, alone people in some faraway country, and that we're here to help and be together and, tackle these challenges together. And so it was an important part of getting us through that last 2 years.
Well, sort of along those same lines, what has been the most exciting part of your work at Uber?
I think for me, first of all, I started pre-IPO, which was something I'd never done before. And so I was hired specifically to mature, Uber has its storied history. I don't need to repeat it, but it wanted to grow up quickly. And that's why it hired me, and to be the face of privacy. And so that was super exciting because it was a company that had already gotten religion on wanting to change. I wasn't sure what would happen when I got to the company. I mean, I did as much due diligence as you can, but you don't know till you set foot in the door. And I thought, do I have to wear my, sign that says we'll work for privacy and try to get people on board before I can even do anything? And that wasn't it at all. They were so excited when I finally landed. They're like, oh my gosh, we've been waiting so long for somebody like you. Like, what do we do? So I was able to move right into strategy and implementation, not all the pre-selling that you have to do at other places to get people interested and involved in why change is needed and why maturity is needed. So once I went around interviewing everybody for like a month, and then, we created our strategy, our KPIs, our key results, all of that. And we hit the ground running. And there was already a really great little team of people here, and we grew it into the nice global team it is now. So that was super exciting and rewarding. And we can see our impact on the business when we look at the products and how we know we've improved them. So it's rewarding that way too.
Well, I'm glad that sounds like there's a lot of exciting opportunities and rewarding experiences there. I guess in terms of just looking at an in-house role in general, what in your experience do you think makes a good or a great in-house lawyer?
Well, I would say you have to have a couple things. First of all, organization and focus. It's not just determining what you will do, because you're not looking to a partner to assign you work now or something like that. It's also determining what you will not do and prioritizing and reprioritizing pretty consistently, and some kind of work project time management system, because you can't do everything and you can't do it perfectly. In fact, the best piece of advice I got when I first started in-house at Sun Microsystems back in its heyday was from my vice president, who said, Ruby, you can't do things perfectly. Some things need a Chevy, some things need a Cadillac. You're going to have to figure it out. All right. And that was so helpful, because as a litigator, everything had to be perfect. Yeah. And so that gave me a license to generate the right work product for the right situation. But it requires you to be able to handle a massive influx of information coming all the time and sort through it and figure out what you're going to do and not going to do. And then the embracing change thing that I already mentioned, don't be me, don't, fight it until you finally realize that it's a good thing. And then lastly, I would say resilience and fortitude. Those are the things that I think are important sort of strengths, I would say, more than experiences or accomplishments that people would need.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, so what type of advice would you give young lawyers who are interested in going in-house or joining a company like Uber?
It's a good question in today's environment. I'm not really sure, how people right out of how people right out of law school are being hired. But in-house jobs are hard if you don't already have some experience, because simply we don't have the training infrastructure that law firms have. And even though I left the firm, I would say I got really fantastic training there. And so if you don't get a in-house job right away, like it doesn't matter. Like you can always get one later. So so that's important. But I would say some things that I consider when I'm looking for, a younger candidate, any candidate, honestly. But I would say, are you a self-starter who can find, ways to figure out things quickly and learn new things quickly and want to learn new things quickly? How well do you do on managing that substantial information that I talked about? Are you comfortable networking and figuring out all the people and stakeholders who are your collaborators and getting to know them, their business, their needs, and their risk tolerance level? Even when I've taken jobs that were similar, or a job function that was similar to one I had before, figuring out that new in-house client's risk tolerance and what their authority was can take a little bit of time. You really have to kind of get to know people. And then, it's different in that you're working for the good of the company now, the entire company, not just one client. And so as an in-house counsel, you have a fiduciary duty to do that. And if you have one client who's only doing what's best for him, then you've got to speak up. You've got to say, yeah, but that's not, when your, ethical compass goes off, that maybe that's not the right thing to do. You've got to be the one to say something. And we have a value at Uber. It's called One Uber because we all work together for the good of the company. And I think lawyers as professional ethicists as well are a good team to try to nudge things in that direction too, because I don't stop at the law. I stop at what's the right thing to do. And that is often more than the law requires.
Right. Well, so I only have one more question before we wrap this up. So you talked a little bit about, I guess, what advice you'd give lawyers who are interested in, joining in-house, but more broadly, is there any career advice you would give young attorneys who are entering this market, or, who have just been in the market for a year or two?
Yeah.
Any sort of general career advice you'd give?
I would, because honestly, even though it was in, the abacus days, in some ways, first of all, it's much easier for me to get a job, both from college and from law school. I happened to graduate from business school in the mid-'80s, where everyone was hiring, like multiple offers, and law school, same thing. So I realize it's a much more challenging environment now, and being hired, through algorithms and stuff is daunting. And so I see a lot of anxiety over it, which is understandable. But at the same time, I had a complete lack of information. First of all, I had no one helping me. I didn't even know what a lawyer did, by the way. I have bungled my way through an excellent career just by being curious and taking new opportunities, even when I didn't know what it meant or what would happen. So I would say, don't worry so much, especially about whatever you're doing today. It's not the rest of your life. And if you don't like it, it's okay. You don't have to do it for very long. And so pick something, anything that looks like it might be interesting and feasible for you, and try it. I have been rewarded by all kinds of weird tasks and jobs that I've done. I was our webmaster on Unix-based systems once, just because I had to read Unix for Dummies, but it was so fun, and I created avatars for everyone.
Yeah.
So you don't know, what may come along that you enjoy doing. And then I would say, always do your best work and be open to learning new things, because if you're doing your best work and learning, that opens up the next opportunity. The opportunities I've gotten, like the privacy and cybersecurity role, weren't because I had a vast background. It was because I was a proven employee time and time again, who could learn anything new, get results, and measure those results and demonstrate them. So I would just say, approach it that way with an open mind, because you never know how a wonderful career will unfold.
Very, very wonderful advice. Thank you so much for joining us today and for taking the time to chat with me. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was great chatting with you, and I hope somebody got a couple pearls of wisdom out of today.
I'm sure.